Good evening and welcome to Real Estate Investing in 2023, taking the uncertainty out of real estate. Thank you for joining us. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I see that you guys have found the chat box. That's the way we'll be communicating with each other. And I really do appreciate your participation. So first of all, who am I? Well, I'm John Spersinski. This is my amazing family here, my wife, Janelle, our middle child, Jana, our youngest, Mara Jade, and our son, LJ. I am the founder of iCandy Homes. I started my real estate education back in 2008, and we started rehabbing houses in 2010. We created iCandy Homes in 2012, and we became the Rich Dad International Hall of Fame members in 2014. We were the Fortune Builders Inner Circle Spotlight, September of 2015. We've done over 134 projects with the acquisition cost of about 22 million, and we have sold or are currently selling real estate properties and deals worth nearly $55 million. So we have a little bit of experience dealing with this subject matter. Now, as we get going here, I have a few agreements and expectations that I'd like to have with you. The first one is that I'd like you to be present. If you're going to take the time to actually be here tonight, then I want you to get as much out of it as possible. So if you have questions you need to ask, if you see something that doesn't quite make sense for you, just go ahead and ask. But don't let your phone or your kids distract you from being able to get what you want to get out of this webinar. Now, does that make sense? Wonderful. Okay, so the next thing I've got on here is nothing I say today is true. Now, the reason I say this is because when we look at things, we see things from our point of view. And if you're looking at something differently than I am, and you see it differently, that's okay. The only way that the things I tell you today are true is if it is true for you. So you need to be able to take the information I'm saying and look at it and evaluate it for yourself. Just because I've done over $50 million in real estate transactions doesn't make me the person that you should listen to blindly. You should look at this and see if it makes sense in your world. And if it doesn't, that's where we come in and we actually look to see what's going on. How is it created? What's the difference in viewpoint, and how can we get on the same page as each other? You have the power to actually decide what is true for you. That's your ability. It's one of the greatest abilities you have because you can actually make it real for you. If you think you're having a good day, then suddenly you start having an even better day. If you think you're having a bad day, then amazingly enough, it gets even worse. That is your power. So the next point on here is participation is key. We have a drill where we take in a breath and we breathe in as long as we can. We're going to do that in just a moment here. And so I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And then when I say start, you'll go ahead and start breathing in as long as you can. And I want you to reply in the chat window how long you were able to breathe in. So let's go ahead and do that drill. We'll start in 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, so for me, that was 9 seconds. How about you guys? Very nice, Janelle. Wonderful. 10, excellent. So the idea of this is, as I'm talking to you, you're essentially breathing in, you're taking in information. And if you just keep trying to breathe in as long as you possibly can, eventually you're going to pass out because you're not exhaling. And exhaling in this situation is replying on the chat. So while I'm talking to you, that's very good, but you being able to reply back to me if something makes sense, if something doesn't make sense, that's key as well, because that's how we get back and forth communication. You'll get more out of this webinar. It'll be more enjoyable for everyone. So let's go ahead and participate. Does that make sense? Great, thank you. So the next one here is, and I've kind of said this before, but if you don't understand something, ask. There aren't any bad questions. You may think that it's something that you just don't get, and it's just you, but chances are there's something that is not making sense for more than just you. So go ahead and ask. Even more importantly, though, is have fun at this. If you want to be successful at things, you need to be able to find a way to create the fun in anything you're doing. Making sure that, well, if you're on a webinar and you're listening to it, find how it can be wonderful and fun for you. If you're having fun, you're more likely to retain, you're more likely to make it your own, and you're more likely to be successful. So let's have some fun. All right, so what is this about? Well, we've got some uncertain times that are going on. We're coming out of a pandemic. There's a recession going on, maybe, possibly, probably, depending on who you talk to. There's some good things in the job market. There's some craziness in the job market. We've got a wonderful inflation that maybe it's starting to get under control, maybe it's not. We've got real estate problems that we need to be able to work through. And then we can look at how this is setting up for some unprecedented times. You know, we've had pandemics before, but we've never had something quite like this, where there's this much reduction in production on a global scale, and what's happening with money and how things are going to go. So, well, what happens after something like this? You know, when are fortunes made? What happens with real estate and generational wealth as you go through the good and the bad of life? And then what dreams, and how can you turn your hopes into and dreams into reality in these unexpected times? So let's get right into it. Let's dive into what is a recession. Well, over the past year, we've had a fair bit of disagreements over what actually defines a recession. If you look at the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER for short, well, they'll tell you that no, we're not actually in a recession. If you looked at my economics professor in college, he would have said we were in a recession. But why is it that I start off with the NBER? Why are they important? Who are they? Well, the first thing is they're the organization that defines U.S. business cycles. Now, they are the quote unquote authority that says, yes, we're in a recession. No, we're not. If we're in a depression, if we're not, they actually go through and define, okay, well, that's great, but who are they? Well, they're a private nonprofit organization that was established back in the 1920s. They actually have 8 economists that form the Business Cycle Dating Committee. So whether or not we're in a recession, based on what the NBER say, is from 8 economists. And they're known for announcing the start and ends well after the fact. So you may have a recession start and it'll already have ended before they say that, oh, we were in a recession. That happened back in 2020 when we had the recession during the pandemic. It was basically a 2-month recession, which, as we'll discuss here in a minute, some people say is, some people say isn't a recession as well. But what they're doing is they're looking for a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months. And yes, they are a dating committee. It's it's very humorous to me too. The gentleman that heads up the NBER is an economist professor at MIT. So not saying that they're not, high caliber people. It's just kind of odd to me that that's where it goes there. But the bottom line is that the government uses these 8 economists to determine if we are in a recession. And so according to those 8 people, we are not in a recession right now, which is great. But what is a recession? If we go back here and we say a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months, well, dating or going by that definition, how do you say that the 2-month recession of the pandemic is actually a recession? Because that was literally March and April, and it was said that it was established in May, and by May it was already recovering. Now, there were extenuating circumstances, I get it, but it's funny how they're willing to call that a recession, but they're not willing to call what we've just been through. So we go, what is a recession? Well, generally and historically speaking, when I went and I had my economics degree, what we talked about was 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product, GDP. Now, by this definition, and this is the definition that we have used for decades to determine if we were in a recession. By this definition, we entered a recession in the summer this year, or this past year. And it's, in July, it started to look like it might be improving, but the bottom line is that it still was going on. Well, okay, great. Why does this matter? Well, the change definition has a significant impact in politics. If you were on the left side of the aisle, then saying we were in a recession was akin to saying that Biden was bad, and that was taboo. That was not something that could be said in the media, on the television. You didn't hear that we were in a recession. There were discussions of it. And of course, if you were on the right leaning, then you were saying that Biden was bad. And we were certainly in a recession. And I'm not saying that either side was right or wrong. If you look at this, you can get the idea of why they're saying that both sides of this, they could make arguments for it. From my point of view, when you start changing the definitions of words, you start indicating that you're not really having things go the way you want. And if you're changing definitions, that you're trying to create a situation that is more favorable to you. But in the end, I don't care about the politics. We need to see how this actually impacts us. So we go back, the last time we had this historical recession, it was during the pandemic, and we had a huge problem with jobs. Well, many businesses were closed, so of course there were problems with jobs. So what's going on with job security now? Well, as of November 19th, initial jobless claims were 240,000. This was actually up from earlier in 2020, but it's not considered bad. The overall numbers they've gotten significantly better. We're no longer in the height of the jobless claims. We're basically at this point, we're back to pre-pandemic employment levels. So that's a very good thing. If we look at the job openings and labor turnover survey, and those numbers, the October numbers were 10.3 million. This is near recent highs, but it does indicate a problem of the demand for workers is coming down. Now, so recent highs is a good thing. That should mean that there's more openings, more jobs available. But the reason why it's down from the recent highs is there's indications that what's going on is companies are starting to find ways to fill those staff positions with non-human people. So you've probably seen on TV that there may be a McDonald's that has eliminated all staff inside and everything is automated to handle their orders. That's not widespread, but that is something that is a very big change in our system. So while it's still strong in that there are demands for jobs, it does look like the actual number of jobs that are being created is coming down. Yeah, and as Janelle said, even some banks don't have tellers anymore. So it's, we started seeing this back when several of the states were considering implementing a $15 minimum hourly salary. And you started seeing the discussion of, well, are businesses going to switch over to where they'll have a higher payout to automate to begin with, but then they won't have, the employee costs going forward. So kind of the idea here is that while there's jobs now, you're still looking at a little bit of uncertainty here, because if you want to find a job right now, you can find one, but it's not looking like we're in the best of shape. If you actually go in and we look at the National Federation of, or NFIB, Small Business Optimism Index, that their optimism towards where the economy is going, what's happening is it's falling. The small businesses are concerned. They're worrying about employment. They're shutting down. They're eliminating positions. And this optimism has been falling for the last 10 months. So while there are lots of layoffs happening, there's a lot of different places that are looking to try and cut their costs because they know that their costs are going up. So they want to see where can we do this. And one of the places that happens is in the human sector, where they can release certain people and hire new people on that are cheaper. It's just what's happening right now. So there is some insecurity in the job market right now. But how is this tied into inflation? Well, inflation is one of the canaries in the coal mine. And the idea of this canaries in a coal mine is, back in days of yore, you would have, in a coal mine, there would be potentially poisonous gases that could be released. And so what they would do is they would have a little bird in a cage. And if the bird was chirping and breathing, then they knew that it was fine and there weren't any problems. But, if the bird fell over dead, they knew that they needed to get out of the coal mine as quickly as possible. So, the dead bird isn't actually normal, in spite of what we're hearing in the media of how inflation isn't that bad. It's transitory. We heard that for months on end. But it's just a signal to the population that their money buys less. It also is a signal to business to cut costs or increase their prices, or both. And one of the dangers that can happen is if you have businesses that are being forced to increase their costs, and it raises the price of their products. And so people need more money to be able to buy their everyday items that they need. They demand a higher price for a wage. They get a higher price for the company, but now because the company is paying a higher price to their employees, now they have to raise their prices again. And then the consumer is now stuck where their money doesn't buy as much as it used to. And so now they need to demand a higher price. And this can lead into the cost work spiral out of control. And so it's a bad situation that we've been trying to control. The Federal Reserve has been trying to increase interest rates to get inflation under control. We've increased by over 2% in the last 12 months, and yet we still have inflation rising. We can say it's rising by less than it has in the past months, but it still continues to rise. Well, what does it all mean? Okay, so, inflation, a very simple definition, is just a general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. So things cost more and you're able to buy less. That's what inflation means. I'll give you the example of if you go out to buy groceries now versus before the pandemic hit. I look back when I was going to Costco for my groceries, it might have been, $400 for a month's worth of groceries for my family. Well, now that's costing me about $800 for the same roughly amount of groceries. And it's just the costs have across the board gone up. If you're buying steak to cook for dinner, it's going up. It's basically doubled in price. And you may or may not notice it. It didn't seem like it was going up that much at a time, but if you actually go back and you compare, well, if it's been going up by 6, 7, 8% every single month, it doesn't take long for that to actually double in price. So then the question becomes, well, does inflation impact real estate? And that's what we've got to look at, is how does it, what do you guys think? Does it seem like inflation would have an impact on real estate? And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What do you guys think? Less buying power, that's a bad thing. Sure. I can definitely see that. But if your money buys less, the prices are going up for sure. And that's the thing that actually happens, that most people, they see real estate prices going up and they just think, oh, that's wonderful, my home is worth more. But the issue is that just because your home is going up in value doesn't mean that your actual buying power is better than it was. So let's go ahead and look at this a little further. Well, the bottom line is home prices have soared. And we're going to look at some historical data here. The first one shows from the 1953 is when they started having monthly average prices for homes that were sold across the US. So this is a monthly chart, and it goes and it shows you, where, if I light this up, let me see here. Okay. If we look right in this area here, you can see this is a sharp incline since 2020. Now, I'm showing you that, and that is what was going on. The issue is that's a little bit older data. If we go to the historical median home value, and so the first one is from Fred, the Federal Reserve. This is out of the St. Louis branch. But this data cuts off before we actually start to see a little bit of a decline. Now, in this map, I made it so it's basically the last 10 years. And you can start to see, well, actually, here, I'll do this. I'll pull this up also. You can see here at the tail end of 22, going into 23, we've started coming down. This correlates to this picture over here. I zoomed in, essentially. The data for both of these, for all three of these charts, is basically the same. I came in and got an adjustable scale for me on this second one, and it's from the website Don't Quit Your Day Job, DQYDJ. And the actual dqydj.com/historical-home-prices, and fred.stlouis, fred.org/series/ASPUS. Those are the two websites I used for these charts. They're publicly available. But what it does is it shows you how we had such huge growth in the marketplace. And on one hand, it makes perfect sense. People were in their homes. They wanted to have, since they couldn't go out as much, they wanted to be more in their homes. You can see this right here was the recession that we had, the beginning of the pandemic. We had very good increases. And basically, I cut this off here, February of 2012. That was where we started that was kind of the bottom of the market for the homes after the 2007-2008 crash. So that was like a 4 or 5 year recession that we went through, the Great Recession. And then this is the recovery from it. So you can see we had a very nice recovery we had a little bit of slowdown in the home market, but not even that much in that 2-month window of a recession. But then we had a huge jump in values in the last year plus, in the last 2 years, basically. So we look at this part here and we're seeing the numbers are coming down. Do you guys have any idea what has been creating a lot of that downward push in the marketplace right now? Interest rates. Yeah, that plays a huge role in it. The interest rates have been going up. Increased rates and layoffs. Yep, absolutely. So the interest rates going up, there's this every 1% that interest rates go up, you're going to see a 10% decrease in home values. That's the rule of thumb that gives you a pretty good estimate of what happened. So if you see that the interest rates have been raised by the Federal Reserve by over 2%, then that means that we've had a 20% push down in home value prices for buyers. And the reason why that happens primarily is because as interest rates go up, then people can afford to buy less of a home. It creates more of a limitation on demand for homes. And so that interest rate goes up, it has that 10%. Every 1% is a 10% decrease in home value price. Now, that doesn't mean that it shows as exactly a 10% decrease. If you have enough pent up demand for properties, then you can still have an increase in value, even though it has been decreased by that 10%. So yes, you are seeing a lack of entry-level homes. We're seeing a lot of these issues. Part of the other problem we have, though, is now homes are not being, the new home starts are down significantly. There's not, and developers have a lot less desire to build these new homes. There's a concern because interest rates have gone up so much that, and also at the same time, you've got inflation that's causing the cost of building these things to go up so high. So like lumber has kind of come back under control, but for a significant portion of the last year and a half, we had lumber that was just going absolutely crazy. It almost seemed like you were carrying gold if you had a load of lumber. In Connecticut, building high-end homes. Yeah. So there is still some building. And that's absolutely true, but the overall starts have been reduced. And so this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you see less starts, then that's a sign that the market is tightening up. And when the market tightens up, then more mom and pop people start hearing about, oh, the market is getting worse for real estate. And there's this big, scary situation of our values going to just go to hell. Now, the question that I'll ask is, do you think that's actually the situation? Is it actually that bad? Or is the real estate, is it one of those things that's going to not be a viable option for people? Are they not going to be able, do people still need to buy homes? Do people still need a place to live? Yeah. So while there may be less people buying homes because they can't afford it, the great thing about it is that even if they can't afford to buy their home, they still need a place to rent. So they're still going to need a place to live. They're going to be renting instead of buying. That's fine as well. So while there are these issues in the marketplace, that doesn't mean that the housing market is trash. And in fact, that's one of the best parts about real estate is that if you buy your property correctly, it doesn't matter if the economy is going to tank or the economy is going to soar. If you buy it right, then you're going to be able to make money in any market. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So why are we here? What is going on? Are we, I know Janelle has some experience in real estate. Lois, are you, or Lois, sorry. Um, are you new to real estate? Is this something that you've done for a little bit? Is it something you're just looking at? Kind of what's your situation? The reason I ask is because if you're newer to real estate, then we can focus in more on the types of real estate, whether you want to look at rehabbing, buy and hold, if you want to look at commercial, the notes that you can buy and sell, mobile homes, tax liens and deeds, wholesaling, all of these. Wonderful. Okay, great. So I love it. That's wonderful. It's okay. Great. I now have a picture in my mind. I really appreciate that information. So you understand the basics of real estate. You understand the different options that you have available to you. And so then the question, on the new people side, it's how to start. But if you already understand what's going on, then it's a simple idea. You're buying, fixing, and selling. That's really all it boils down to. Whether you're in rehab, whether you're in buy and hold, whether you're in commercial, whether you're in mobile homes, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You're still coming back to buy, fix, and sell. Now, it may be that if you're buying and holding, you're going to hold it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years before you sell it. So it's a longer term between the buy and the sell, but it's still a similar situation. You also understand that execution is the issue in this, because that's where you can have contractor delays, you have villages and permits, and you can look at your lenders and see how that's going. And you need to know when to pay and when to not pay your contractors, when are the pitfalls that you can get in trouble for if you start to do things. Because a lot of people will ask to be paid up front, and you need to have a system in place so that you can be sure that you're going to actually be able to do this correctly. So newer investors have a tendency to look at shiny penny and just want to handle that. It's the shiny penny syndrome. Experienced investors have an issue with that as well. A lot of people have a problem of they need to have something before they can actually start, whether that's the education or business cards or money. Sure, I'll talk to you a little bit about notes. Yeah, absolutely. The realtors, like a lot of these things people say they have to have, but it's an excuse not to start. For experienced investors, we also have shiny penny syndrome. We can fall into traps, and those traps can be analysis paralysis, focusing on the money, looking for permits, and when we get them, when we don't, the fear that we have, and there's just unknown things that we think we don't know, that we can't, that we don't want to make mistakes on. So let's continue through here. Okay, so the shiny penny syndrome, this is just, it's one of these things of the more you learn about real estate, the more you see there are additional options that you could do. When you first are hearing about real estate, you probably think about a single family home, and then you're like, okay, well, I could buy it and I could live in it and that would be good. And then you learn that you can actually get other people's money to fund your deals, and you start thinking, well, maybe I could do a couple of these at the same time, and you start to see that there's more that you could do, and it becomes just where you get distracted as you look at the different things. There's so many different places that you can, yes, squirreling, yes, absolutely, I totally understand that. the real issue is that we fight this jack of all trades versus a master of one. As you learn more about real estate and the temptation to find the next quick buck, the next thing that's going to be the next Airbnb or the next condo conversion that's going to work out so well, or all the next things that you can do. I've had investor friends that have worked on railway container cars as buildings, as using that to build homes. Like, there's lots of different ways you can do it versus actually coming in and focusing on one spot and knowing it left, right, and center and just nailing it that way. So being able to not get distracted by the new and shiny thing is a wonderful thing to do. When you have your business up and running and you actually have it to where you have systems in place and it continues to kick out money for you, then if you want to expand into something more, and you can set aside 5%, 10% of your time, or 5 or 10% of your money so that you can expand into this new area, that's fine. But you still need to have that basic business that's running for you so that you don't get financially in trouble. Does that make sense? Great. Okay. Now, the have to have before you can do it, this falls into the, well, if I just had the money, I'd do a deal, or if I just had knowledge, I would. If I just had a buyer, when I first started doing real estate, back before I ever got to JT, I came in and I was looking at it. I was doing the Rich Dad education. We had taken courses, my wife and I, for 2 years before we ever did our first deal. And, I was in a class on mobile homes of all things. And, they were talking about how you can sell the mobile home before you actually buy it. And that was just so crazy to me that you could actually sell something before you had it, that I couldn't imagine it. And, so the opposite of if I just had a buyer, I could do this. Well, no, I had to have a property before I could find a buyer. And, well, if I just knew where to look, I could. And what came to me and what I recognized in that class was all of these, well, if I just, it all boils down to, it was an excuse not to start. You can find a contractor if you're willing to look for it. It comes back to this point of view of, I can't have it, so I can't start. And, there are a lot of people who get stuck in the, I have to have the best business card, or I have to have the best pitch, or I have to have, the elevator pitch, or like, you don't have to have those things. If you just start doing the correct actions, then you do them again and again and again. And the first time you do it, you may be terrible. The 10th time you do it, you may be bad. The 50th time you do it, you're going to be not so bad. The 100th time you do it, you're going to be pretty good. The 1,000th time you do it, you're going to be amazing. And so it just became, okay, I can talk to a realtor and I can get rejected by them. And I might say the wrong thing, but after I talk to 30 of them, after I talk to 40 of them, it's not going to be a problem. Because I know there's more realtors out there that I can work with, or I know there's other money lenders out there. It's not just one mythical money person that's going to work with me or not. This is also known as analysis paralysis. Moving right along, the traps. This is what kind of gets the more seasoned investors. Yeah, for sure. One of the biggest traps is looking at the dollar signs versus looking at the ROI. Now, big money on the back end is a temptation. If you see something and there's going to be a $50,000 payday for you in, as soon as you finish this project, or you look at it and you see, oh, hey, if I do this $1 million home, I've got $500,000 of profit on the back end of it. We're going to show you one of those projects here. And it's so tempting to just look at, well, if everything goes right and I do this deal, I'm looking at $30,000, $50,000, $100,000. multiple $100,000 on this one deal, and all I have to do is make that one deal go right. Okay. ROI is return on investment. Another way of saying it is return over investment, or R over I. The idea with this is that ROI takes into account something much more important than just the money or just the investment. Do you know what that is? Exactly, Janelle. It's time. The temptation is to fall for the bigger the money on the back end equals more money in your pocket. But that's not really the way this situation works. I'm going to show you 669 Dundee Road in Glencoe, Illinois. This is one of the biggest projects we did. It's an absolutely beautiful home. It turned out stunning. We had an amazing Christmas party there. We estimated when we were looking at doing this deal, we're going to buy it for $300,000. We would rehab it for $650,000. So we were expecting to go into this along with carrying closing costs for north of $1 million. We were looking at like 1.1 million roughly. As we looked at this, we had a lot of comps that we felt very confident we could get $1.7 million on a sale price. And if we sold it for that 1.7 million, that meant we had $580,000 of profit on this project. Now, of course, we were going to tie up a significant amount of money, and we were going to be borrowing that money. The cost of that money we estimated to be $122,211.54, because we had actually how long we were going to borrow the money, how much it was going to cost us interest rate wise. So we planned it in, and we came up with a projected profit of $457,788. Now, at the time we looked at this, we said, hey, that's an amazing sum of money. If we had done 10 other deals at $45,000 each, it would have made less money than this one was supposed to kick out for us. Now, of course, if this is on the what scares you and the traps page, there's going to be something about this that isn't so good. So let's get into it. The actual results, where we did purchase it for $300,000, we had a beautiful home, but the rehab was actually $700,000 instead of $650,000. Now, on a $650,000 rehab, to only have $50,000 in overages means that we actually stayed really close to our budget. In actuality, we were under our budget. We were closer to about $630,000, but we had to add in a library, and that library cost us, the number that's coming in my head right now was like $70,000. It was like all custom built in. It seems impossible that it was that expensive, but that's what it's coming up as I see it. We had a pole that was in a room that we needed to build the library around. Anyway, my point being is that a $50,000 overage on $650,000, that's less than 10%. That's actually pretty darn good cost control. Our carrying closing costs were accurately projected, because how much you're going to hold it for and what you're going to sell it for, those closing costs, that doesn't really change. The carry costs were up higher, but our sales price was $200,000 lower. So that's how that netted out being about the same. So our profit came in. Now we're looking at a $350,000 profit instead of a $580,000. And we're already starting to see that there's an issue here. The money cost us about $300,000 instead of the $122,000 because we actually held this property for over 12 months. That means that for all the work we did on this home, we ended up netting out $50,000. For over a year's worth of work, we netted roughly one of our normal project profits. Looking at this, we were blinded by the projected profit. That nearly $600,000 of profit we saw and thought, oh, this is amazing. Yet we failed to recognize all the pitfalls of, yeah, we can keep our costs there, but if we have to change contractors, if we come in and we get to where it doesn't sell in the time frame we think, then we start to get into winter. And then we've got, are we going to sell it in the winter months? Is it going to sit? And like, we did a lot of things to get movement, but this thing sat on the market for, I want to say, 4 or 5 months without ever actually getting an offer coming in. And when the first offer came in that was legitimate, at 1.5 million, we tried to counter with them and they held firm. And the end result was we decided we don't want to take the chance of it taking another 6 months for us to find somebody that may offer us closer to the 1.7, or they may not. They may come back at the 1.5 ballpark as well. So because of it being a limited pool of buyers, this was actually more difficult for us to find a buyer. And these are things that are obvious if you take a step back and look at it. But when you're blinded by the dollar signs, you lose track. If we would have looked at this as an ROI investment, it would have been really clear that the issues for us were, if this project took more than 6 months, our return on investment was going to be super low. So this is one of those things where you've got to be able to look at it and see, where is that? Am I coming in? Am I buying it at such a good discount? Buying this property for $300,000 and knowing we were going to be able to sell it for well north of $1 million, it seemed to be a no-brainer, but it just wasn't quite that way. So you've got to be able to look at your deals and see, okay, fine. If I'm going to put $600,000 of rehab into it, how many weeks am I going to need to be on that project? One of our estimating numbers that we use is for every $10,000 of rehab, that's 1 week of time that we're going to need to do it. It's not exact. Like when you get into these bigger things like this, that's not going to be, it didn't take 65 weeks for us to be able to rehab this project. But it gives you, if you're in the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 ballpark, saying that it's going to be $10,000 a week, that's not a crazy number. So when you started bringing in the time valuation on this, that's where this deal really was a trap. And I'm glad you can see, because it's certainly something that at the time we didn't see it. And now we look back on it, this is the most expensive home, either the most or the second most expensive home we ever sold. And very proud of our work, but it's not a deal that if I had to do over again, we wouldn't have bought it in the first place, or we would have bought it and we would have wholesaled it to somebody that wanted to take on the bigger project, that, maybe they had a better system for that high-end home than we did. But from my point of view, the ROI on it just didn't work at all. Yeah, and it is true. We made money on it. It's not that I'm coming in and saying that this was the worst deal we ever did. Far from it. We made money. That's good. But the issue is we had, at the time we did this deal, we had 14 team members at iCandy Homes. And, if you're splitting that 50,000 between 14 people, that goes down pretty fast. And that's not counting overhead. And that's, yada, yada, yada. So you want to take that time into account. And that's something that not a lot of real estate investors actually recognize until they've been in it longer. So now that we've shattered the dollar signs and the most important, let's look at some of the other things that can scare us. And one of them is permits. How do permits work? Well, every city, town, village, township, county has different requirements. But how can you possibly know which ones apply and where? It seems like this is just something that would be really difficult to know and to figure out. The issue with it is because this is something that a lot of people they look at it and they see, oh, there's a lot of code, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of that. They don't want to look into it more. And so they'll say, well, do we have to have a permit to do this? And there are some contractors that will say, no, you don't need permits. And they'll do the work and they'll say that they'll do it to code. And some of them will and some of them won't. And you have a question of, are you going to believe them? Because if you don't know what the code is yourself, how can you possibly know if they're doing the work to code or not? And so then you can start, well, how do we determine in each instance if you need a permit? So like looking at it, you've got to be able to say, okay, how can I work this? How can I set this up so that I can actually be successful in every project that I do? You know, we've done 135, 140 projects, and you've got to be able to see, how do I make sure that I'm not going to get screwed over on a project because I didn't pull a permit when we come down to the closing wire, and now instead of being able to close, I've got a city that's not giving us an occupancy permit. So when do you get permits? Everyone says that you can apply for permits after you buy the house. But the issue with that is that it takes however long the village takes. You can't control them. So you've got to be able to look and see, you know, do your walk through the property, have an inspection, look and see what you expect. Go and talk to the village, go and talk to the county, go and talk to the city, whatever it is, go and talk to them and find out, would you expect a permit to be needed if I'm doing X, Y, and Z? If I'm painting the walls and I'm, you know, fixing any patches in drywalls, or I'm going to replace the carpet, do I need a permit? Yes or no? Some places, there are some villages that will say yes, I'm sure. Most will say no, you don't. If it's a cosmetic rehab and you don't, and you're not doing anything, you're not going in and changing any of the plumbing, you're not going in and changing the electrical, then you're going to be, they'll say you probably don't need it. But you've got to ask. You know, how can you control when an inspector will check your property? How can you know you'll pass each inspection and not fall behind on your schedule? These are the issues that come up that you've got to be able to deal with if you want to be able to successfully have a real estate business. Even if you're going into buy and hold, you still need to know how to pass inspections. You still need to have a system in place for you to be able to get things done as you need to. Another thing that scares existing and new real estate investors is contractors. You know, how do I find a good contractor? How do I know if he's actually good or not? Is he licensed? How can I check to see? Is it posted somewhere? Is he going to present it to me? Like, does he need to be licensed? You know, we down here in Pinellas County and in the Tampa Bay area, they actually had like city officials would pose as contractors, or they would come in and try and hire contractors to see if they were licensed, and, you know, or if they would be bonded in the area. And it's exactly, they had a sting operations where they were arresting contractors that said they were and weren't. And, you know, that's an issue that you need to come through. So you need to be able to confront and look, and, you know, whose contract should we use? These, like, there's so many things that seem like I have to do this, I have to use his contract. No, you don't at all. We have our own contract that we use, and I would recommend you have a similar one to that so that you actually are in control of it. Now, the contract that you're working with, they have to agree to the contract, and they have to read the contract so that they know what they're signing. You know, if they come in and they're asking, should I pay 50% down or 25% down or 75% down or hell, 100% down? Like, no, the short answer is no, don't do it. But like, a lot of contractors will tell you, well, I have to get 50% down or I won't start. Okay, then I find somebody else. Also need to ask if permits were done for additions. Yeah, that's one of the things, like we've had some of these things come and bite us in the backside as well. We've seen some amazing things. In Chicago, you find people do additions and stuff like that, and you're thinking, okay, fine. We've seen some crazy stuff down here in the Tampa Bay market. Just like there was one house we were rehabbing, they had an outlet in an expansion that they had added onto the home, and it looked just like a normal outlet. But once you got into the wall, that outlet was hooked up to an extension cord. It was just one of the orange extension cords that was wide, that went through the wall, up over the walkway, around and down, and they just spliced it into the other wiring. And I'm like, I was just shocked that people would actually do that. So like, this is the thing, is when you're coming through and you're trying to find, what needs to be done, you've got to check some of these things. And if you don't actually check in the walls to see what's going on, you need to actually assume that there's a problem. Because if you don't assume that there is, and you don't check, then if there is, you get penalized and you get hurt. And what does it mean to actually have your contractor be ahead of you? Now, this ties directly into the should you pay him 50% down. If your contractor is doing work and being paid afterward, then your contractor is not, like, your contractor is getting things done. But if your contractor and then getting paid, but if your contractor is ahead of you, it means that you're paying him before he does the work. And so he's wanting to be ahead on pay. We don't ever want our contractors to be ahead on pay. We want them to be behind, because they need, that's how you make sure they're actually going to do the work. As they do it, you see that it's right, and then you pay them. They pass inspection, then you pay them. It's not that they have to 100% complete everything. We just need them to have benchmarks that they hit and that we make sure are correct before we pay them, because we don't want them to get ahead of us. When contractors are ahead, that's when they walk off. Does that make sense? Okay. Continuing on the idea of contractors, we do have a lot of investors have a fear of replacing a contractor. The idea is that, well, I might not know as much about rehabbing as they do. And the truth of the matter is that's irrelevant, whether you know more or less than him about rehabbing in general or that project specifically. What we need to do is we need to plan correctly so that we can give the contractors we give contractors the setup so that they can succeed. And we give them time to fix unforeseen issues if they can't catch up. Or we give them time to fix those unforeseen issues. And if they can't catch up, well, then at that point, we've got to let go of them. We have to find somebody else. It's very simple for a one-day delay to turn into a week, and then a week delay turns into a couple weeks, and then a couple weeks turns into a month, and then a month turns into 2 months, and then suddenly your contractor has walked off, because now it's not that you're ahead of him, but he just doesn't know how he can get back on track, and he thinks, well, I can't get my money here, so I'm going to walk to another project instead. We want to help them so that they don't have poor contractor use of money. And if you see something that doesn't feel right, act now. Don't wait for this. Like, we had an issue on one of our houses where, one of my employees said to me, in 2 weeks, this guy's going to walk off. And I was like, okay, well, why don't we fire him now? Well, he'll get more done in the 2 weeks. He really didn't. And we were right. He did walk off in 2 weeks. But the issue is that we weren't confident in being able to replace the contractor. And I definitely understand how some contractors are chauvinistic pigs. Met a few of them. The part of the game is being able to get them, like when we talk about building in time to fix unforeseen issues, what I'm actually talking about is working with the contractor to schedule out what it's going to take, like having him build his timeline for you, with you. So you're not telling him what it has to be. You're letting him teach you, which for the chauvinistic people out there actually makes them feel good, that they're teaching you something. And again, in the end, we don't care if they think they're teaching us something or not. What we care about is that they actually get a plan in place that they follow so that they actually get things done on time. Does that make sense? So we do have other unforeseen issues that can happen. How was I supposed to know that the 100-year-old house had bad stuff behind the walls? Now, this can come in the form of old electrical, you know, yeah. They, to your point, it is simply, yeah, it may, that's a nice way of doing it as well. Because if you make it so that the two of you are there and well, you control the purse strings, a lot of contractors understand that because that's part of what they do. So that's a nice workaround as well. So I like that approach too. Coming back to how was I supposed to know the old house had bad stuff behind the walls? You need to check. Like, can you actually predict all the things that need to be done to a house before you buy it? Well, you need to check. You need to look. Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of old houses in New England, and most of them have problems. And so, as you start going through these more and more, or as you go through them more and more, you notice the things that you need to check for more specifically, but you also need to be willing to come in and look at these things. Like, go through and actually look, unscrew the electrical, pull it out, see how it's connected. Like, you don't have to rip a hole in the wall, but you can look and see, are there any indications that there's issues with water damage? You look for these things. You check every room, you check for the little details that give you indicators of issues. And sure, you can have a home inspection, have those people check as well. But it also, like, part of the thing is creating the list for yourself. Right now we're sitting at a time where arguably we're in a recession, we're not in a recession, but one thing that can be fairly easily agreed to is that we're not in the best economic time. Does it make sense to do real estate right now? If the market really crashes, can you still do it? And the short answer is yes. Like, real estate is an excellent opportunity to do these things. We're going to talk about that more in a few minutes here. But if a village require you to change existing issues, that's fine. You talk to them before you buy the house to find out if they're going to put that on you. You don't ignore the potential issues because they've changed code. And, there are some places, we went through this in Chicago, in Elmhurst, like they came through and the village had issues with contractors not bringing things up to code. And they had a couple of lawsuits that happened, and now they're like, okay, you're bringing it up to code. You sell the house, whenever you sell it, it's being brought up to code. They don't care. Fine. That's not the way I would do it, but if that's what you're doing, if that's what you're dealing with, know it before you ever get into it, so that you don't buy a house that you think you can put 30,000 into, but need to put 70 or 80,000 into to bring it up to code currently. How do you find this information out? Really simple. You just need to talk to people. You ask the village. You go to the different places and you find out. You talk to your contractors. If they're having, you find out, are you super busy, or is this your only job that you have right now? Do you have multiple crews that you're working, or do you, are you cutting back your people? If you do, are you still going to be able to take on another house? You need to have those conversations just to find out where you are. Can you get money for your deals? There's millions of people that are lending money out for people to do rehabs. If you are willing to look, you can find it. There's no question about it. What will your property be worth after fixing it up? If you buy it right in the first place, you can have a dip and it still be something that you can make money on. The other side of it is if you've got a house that you're buying and you're worried the market might tank, talk to your money and see, hey, if we have a market collapse, are you going to be okay with us renting this house out for the next 6 months, the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, the next 5 years until the market recovers so that we can then actually make money when we sell it? Or are you going to force a fire sale in the middle of the market being bad? It's not that I'm saying it has to be one way or the other, but you need to have that conversation with your money people before you get into that situation so that if that situation ever occurs, you've already had that conversation and you're not struggling with, well, I don't want to sell it now because I'm going to be left with a negative property or negative money that I need to bring money to the table to sell it. And I don't want to do that. Does that make sense? It really boils down to, are you willing to communicate about these things? And the problems can just fly away. The wonderful thing is that fortunes are made in times of struggle. During the Great Depression, we had more millionaires were made than any other time in history. You can see Colonel Sanders, Bill Hewitt, and Dave Packard, companies that are still here to this day. Amazingly enough, they have survived. Real estate demand was low, and so visionaries bought up till the market recovered. And then when the market recovered, they were able to sell a portion to pay off any debt they had. And they were able to come out smelling much sweeter. Now, the issue is the average person didn't do that. The average person couldn't find a way to make things work. The average person got crushed and lost a lot of money, and wealth was transferred from them to a select few. So the issue is that it's not that the everyday normal actions are going to be the things that are going to make you a millionaire. You've got to be able to find the opportunities and see how you can take advantage of them. During the Great Recession, we had businesses were created: WhatsApp, Venmo, Groupon, Instagram, Uber, Pinterest, Square. Most of these companies, most of these people will not create a new fortune during these unprecedented times. That's not what the average person is going to get. The people that are just going to stick with the status quo is going to get what everybody else gets, basically screwed. So we need to find the way to change what you are currently doing so that you can get to a place where you can exceed and come into an amazing growth period for yourself. This is your chance to change not just your life, but your entire family's lives. We talked earlier a little bit about the note market, and most people don't realize that when you have mortgages and when a lender gives money and to a person and they buy a home, if it's a bank, if it's a private lender, if it's a family friend, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the way that typically works is that there's a mortgage that is created that is publicly recorded, and it says I have a right to, if this property sells, to be paid back on on the money that I gave for this property. So that's the publicly recorded is the mortgage. The promissory note is the promise to pay. The promissory note is not recorded publicly. It is a private document between the individual who bought and the individual who loaned the money. That comes in, and it is simply that promissory note says that I have a promise to pay this much money at this interest rate over this period of time. Those promissory notes can be bought and sold. Banks do that. They will, if they have properties that are not being paid, then what they'll do is they'll potentially take those distressed notes and they'll sell them off. There is a business that can be had to buy notes, go back in, renegotiate the contracts with people who are not paying on their notes, and then get to where those people are paying on the notes, or where they'll give you the keys in agreement or in exchange for you not foreclosing on the property. There's different strategies that you can use to actually get that property or to get that person back into paying on the note again. But then once you have either the property free and clear, or you have a note that is being paid, now you can sell that note for a profit. The expectation, like I've seen it happen where, somebody could have, as an example, a $200,000 loan to a bank. The value of the home went down to where, it may have been 300,000 when they got the loan, but it now is down at 150. So they're upside down $50,000 on the note. They're not able to, they lost their job during the pandemic, and now maybe they found a new job, but they're 6 months behind, they're 9 months behind, they're a year behind. And with penalties and fees, they don't feel like they can get caught up. So they're not paying their mortgage. The bank can potentially say, it's better for me to write this off. I'm going to sell the note at a loss, but I'm going to get the cash in. The banks have for every non-performing note they have to have so much cash liquid. And for performing notes, then they get to lend more. So that's the general idea. And so if they have a non-performing note, it's better for them to sell it and get rid of it at a loss than it is for them to keep holding it. Does that make sense? Okay. So when the bank sells that note off, it could be to another bank, it could be to a private individual, it could be to another business. It doesn't necessarily have to be bank to bank. So then as they sell that note off, then now the person that bought it, they can go in and negotiate with the homeowner. Let me see here. Sorry, I'm just fixing this. There we go. So the person comes in, they bought the note from the bank. Now they've got a $200,000 note on a house that's worth 150 that they have back, money that's owed and fees and blah, 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 blah. Well, that new owner of the note can take that to the homeowner and say, hey, I know your home is only worth 150 right now. Let's set up what can we actually do that makes sense that you could start paying on this note. So they work out a plan, and they say, instead of it being a $200,000 note, now it's going to be, as an example, $125,000 note. And they amortize it over the 30 years. They get to where they're starting to pay on it again. And once, 6 months have gone by, a year has gone by, they now have a history of paying this new note to this new lender. And at that point, the lender can take that note and sell it to another person as a performing asset. The magic in notes is that person who bought the distress note, it was worth $200,000, but because of the fact that it was distressed, they may have paid 10 or 20% of the face value, literally paying pennies on the dollar for that. Instead of paying $200,000 for it, maybe they paid $25,000, $30,000 for that property or for that note, because they don't actually get the property itself. But even if they paid, let's say, $50,000 for that mortgage, they go to the homeowner and the homeowner says, yeah, I agree that the home is still, it still has value. We'll agree to the 125 value on it, and we can pay that. We'll amortize it over 30 years. We'll pay this off. Well, for $50,000 note, they now have $125,000 value that they're being paid. Do you see that benefit? So that's actually in the more likely scenario, but it also can be a situation where the people who are in the home, after the note buyer buys the note, they go talk to them to try to work out something that works for them. And they say, you know what, we can't do this. We're going to move in with our parents or whatever the situation may be. We really don't want you to foreclose on us. Can we just give you the keys instead of you foreclosing? Yes. Okay, fine. Because they don't have a job or because whatever creates the situation where they just want to get out of it. Now the person who bought the note for $50,000 actually has a $150,000 home that they own free and clear because they traded the keys for not foreclosing on them. Does that make sense? So that's, in a nutshell, the note buying business. There's tons more data out there for it. Happy, if you have more questions, I can follow up with you separately. But the idea of buying and selling notes is a very wonderful thing. You know, that $125,000 note, once they're paying on it again, they're not, if they were to try to sell that ahead of time, they're not going to get full 100% value of the note as it's paid out over time. They may get 95%. Or 90%, somewhere in there. They're going to be a discount so that they can get the cash now instead of being paid out over the future, over the next 30 years. So there is a discount. So they may not be getting the 125, they may be getting 100 for it, but that's still, if they bought it for 50 and they talked to the homeowner and in 6 months they made a $50,000 profit from that, that's not a bad bit of work. Does that make sense? Okay. So that ties back into, there's so many different ways that you can work real estate, where in that situation, as a note holder, you don't ever have to touch the property itself, but you can create generational wealth just by creating a business around helping people out of a bad situation, whether it's a bank that's in a bad situation that has bad debt on their books that they need to get rid of, and so they offer to sell it at a discount, or whether it's somebody who lost their job and they need to get out of their home without it being foreclosed on, or whatever the case may be. You can talk to people who, there's probate lists, and what that is somebody passes away and the estate has to pay the taxes on it, and so they'll set up a probate to handle any taxes that need to be paid. Well, a lot of people that go through probate, they have houses that they don't want, so they'll sell those houses. So you can talk to probate attorneys, you can look and find lis pendens, which are foreclosure proceedings, that you can see, okay, these are the people that might be selling their home or in the foreclosure process. And there's so many different ways to create wealth in real estate. If you look at the richest families in America, who are 2 or 3 of the people that you think of when you think of the richest families in America or the richest people in America? Gates, absolutely. Well, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Michael Bloomberg, Steve Ballmer, these are people that I think of. Bill Gates, largest farmland owner in the US. Warren Buffett, one of the biggest stock market tycoons. These guys, what do they have all in common? Steve Ballmer is a basketball team owner from the NBA. Michael Bloomberg, mayor and politician and businessman. Well, the thing that they have in common the most is that they have ownership of significant real estate in their portfolio. Now, how do you create real estate and generational wealth, or how does that happen? The issue is that what you really need to do is you need to find one area of real estate and become a master. Don't jack of all trades it and try to dabble in 15 different things. We talked about earlier, if you do something one time, you may be good at it. If you try to do 50,000 things, or if you try to do 50 things, each one time, you may be good at some of the 50, you may be bad at some of the 50, but in the end, it's going to be hit or miss. If you come in and you do one thing 50 times, by the time you do it that 50th time, you're going to be a master at it. The next step to creating real estate and generational wealth is focus on return on investment. Don't let yourself get distracted by the big dollar sign. I don't care what type of real estate it is, whether you're in the Northeast, the West, the South, Florida, Chicago, whatever. Focus on the return on investment and you won't be led astray. And one more thing that you need to make sure that this is able to do. No, it's not have fun. You should have fun doing it, whatever it is, but make sure that it is repeatable. Because if you can't repeat it, if you can't do it again and again and again, then you're trying to get lucky, you're trying to play the slots, you're trying to make things happen by chance as opposed to controlling what's going on. Does this make sense so far? Excellent. So opportunity is looking for you. Have you driven or walked by a house that was boarded up? Maybe you've seen a yard that's not mowed and a couple of the windows have boards over it or a broken window. These are opportunities that are there. Not everyone sees it as that, though. Some people see that and they just say, oh, I can't believe they've let the house go. Or this is terrible. Why aren't they taking better care of it? Well, it's not for us to say that somebody is doing something right or wrong. We just need to look and see, oh, that house has issues. Let's see if there's something I can do to change that and make it into a better situation. Many people heard about this webinar, yet there's only 3 of us here. Wouldn't it be nice if you were actually able to look at the check to see if you can pay for it, to just pay, knowing you got the money? Give that special gift to your significant other so that you remember that moment forever, that special time that you had. Or maybe you want neighbors who are envious of your car, your boat, your house, your jewelry, or whatever. I'm looking for people that can take action and follow through to get results. There's a lot of real estate programs out there where people give a lot of great information, but it's not something that people can actually use. Well, if you go to newyears.realestateheroacademy.com, that's our online course sign up, where we'll give you the information you need to actually start your rehab business or grow your existing rehab business. This course will help you buy anything that you want. You look at it, if you've got a business that is repeatable, that has systems in place so that you can do again, that means that you just need to follow the system so that you can go through and actually buy or sell as many homes as you want to create the income that you want. With that done, then you actually can control how much money that you bring in. You'll be able to stop worrying about how much something costs because you will produce massive income. You'll see how projects get done on time and on budget, allowing you to enjoy the life you always wanted. It is possible to see how rehab projects happen, to plan every single time. Now, if you sign up now, you're on your way to the life you always wanted. This is a month-plus series that starts on February 2nd with 1 session per week. This isn't about it being 4 lessons, 5 lessons, 6 lessons, 7 lessons. What it is focused on is achieving the result of getting you to the point where you can actually achieve your end result. We'll help you set up so that you can see, okay, this is the return on investment that I'm looking for on projects. This is the number of projects that I need to, this is the number of offers I need to put in so that I can get a project a month, or so that I can get a project a quarter, or so that I can get a project a year. Whatever it is, we can help you set it so that you can see these are the realistic targets that you need to hit on a daily basis so that you can get your results. A lot of courses come through, they teach you the information, but they don't actually have you start implementing it. In our first lesson, you will have homework that puts you on the path to actually achieving the day-to-day actions that you need to do while you're in the course, so that if you have questions, you can ask, what's going on? I didn't get this, or I tried to do this and I had this problem, and we'll answer all of those questions with each of the webinars. So that's the part of the reason why we don't say exactly how many lessons it is because if it comes in and we're supposed to get together for say 2 hours, and before we can start the next lesson, you have 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour of questions. Well, I want to be able to answer those, and then we'll go into the next lesson. It's not something where you're going to not do anything. Like, we give you everything you need for you to be able to do the real estate process and know that you're doing it correctly. We do have a 100% money back guarantee. And for one day only, we have a special discount for the next 24 hours of $3,300 for our course. 24 hours from now, the price is going to go back to the normal $10,000. So if this is something that you'd be interested in, I would be happy to answer any questions you have. We are looking forward to doing this course as an exciting way for us to get more people involved in real estate. The economy is in an interesting situation, and it's my firm belief that we need to get each and every one of us to be producing more and more so that we're able to actually weather the storm that is coming. With that, thank you for coming. newyears.realestateheroacademy.com, and we really appreciate you attending. Thank you so much.